you don't get stampede. We'll work it out. Thank you, everybody, for coming to this talk. So this is Behat for beginners. Automated testing in 5 easy steps. So I'm going to try and pitch this to you like the rotisserie spinner or something like that. Make it as inviting as possible to get started with Behat and automated testing in general. So let's start right off then by who am I and why should I be talking about this? So I'm a product owner and a QA at Vixel Solutions. So we have a table out there if you'd like to come see us. And what we specialize in is Drupal implementations for government agencies, much like yourselves. In fact, how many people here are working for a government agency? Great. A more sensitive question, how many people are running on Drupal 8 already? Yeah, it can be scary. So that being said, I am the product owner of 3 specific Drupal products that we're running, all on Drupal 8. We actually hit the ground running and launched the product last July, which was great for the amount of modules that were already ready, which is a big zero, but it allowed us to kind of get our feet wet with Drupal 8 and get going. And now we're at this point where people have started porting modules, developing new modules, so it's a really exciting time to be on Drupal 8, and we're bringing over a new product that is launching this summer and are continuing to utilize Drupal 8. So if you haven't already switched, highly recommend. And this will help you make that switch. So to give you an idea of some of the big challenges that we face with just these 3 products, and Vixel, of course, has many other products that they're supporting with Drupal 7 and 8. Just with the 3 products that I'm the product owner and QA for, and when I'm describing these, think about the QA part and how nightmarish some of these things would be as a QA. So multi-factor authentication. So since we're working for a government agency, they want, and for those of you who were at the last talk where they described using Active Directory to create users, we not only do that, we also pull keys from government issued IDs. We ping LDAP for authentication to one of our products, and we also use SOAP requests to an external system with DISA to authenticate users that way as well. So that's just one of those bullets. If you can imagine, those 4 very different scenarios can lead to a lot of anxiety about the product, and where QAing becomes very difficult, because whenever you have a new release, even just validating that login works is a long process. So to add to that anxiety, we also encrypt our data for one of our products, both at rest and in transit, and it's based around a form that, depending on the fields that you enter into, that data is then encrypted and stored encrypted, and through various cron jobs, depending on how old the data is, it gets removed and things like that. So that alone, bullet number 2, is another QA nightmare. And then, as with any government agency, we have complex data integration to very old data systems. Also, just some non-performant queries to Oracle databases. We have integrations with a Cold Fusion system or 2. And also, more modern, we use the Google Maps API and integrate with that for some of our some of our pieces of our product. So the data integration is another thing that needs to be validated with every release, every code change. We need to check that we're still pinging these systems and getting the correct data back. And then finally, the story of all of our lives, I'm sure, as Drupal folks, is that we have multiple workflows, tons of user roles, incredibly elaborate permissions. Unfortunately and fortunately, Drupal lends itself to some of the bureaucracy of some of these agencies, and we are able to accommodate some of the complex approvals and things like that with Drupal's strength in workflow and permissions management. But those are just 4 bullets that need to be validated with every release, every code change. If you can imagine, of course, I didn't even address various content types, various taxonomies, Solar in general, search, and things like that. So even with just these highlights, it can get very overwhelming to maintain a product of that complexity. So that is where automated testing starts to get appealing. And I'm assuming from everyone attending here, you're kind of feeling the same way, that if you had automated testing set up, that would save you resources, both time and people. Around the time of one of our products launching with every major release, I would essentially have between 30 and 80 manual validations that would be running after each release. And so it was create a content type of this type with this user, create a content type of this type with another user. It made releases, which on the release, the actual physical release that is going out, that part was brief and maintained. But then the validation after the fact took so long that our release windows extended more and more, because we would just have to validate as our baseline more and more items. So that's anything from the navigation being not 508 compliant, making sure that that's available, making sure that processes are still available if you have a certain workflow, if you have a form that submits to this particular email group after submission, and just general interactions. So we had one release where we released completely unrelated code to what we thought was a separate function, but essentially after the release we found out that one of our drop-down menus was now translucent. Little things like that you can't prep for everything, especially not one person, one team. You want to build a system that speaks to your team, that is as complex and has as much potential as your team does. And with that, you don't want to restrict yourself from validating all those elements. So that all sounds great, but why should you care? Luckily, those of us who've already switched over to Drupal 8 core in Drupal 8 allows, or has brought in many of the things that we just kind of assumed, okay, we're launching a Drupal 7 site, so we want to get these 20 modules just to get us to a point that is something that people want to use. So at the very least with Drupal 8, we benefit from a lot of those processes that we normally would have to get these contributed modules are now included in Drupal 8 core. So that's great, that's nice, but from that, everyone wants their own custom content types. Everyone wants to be able to organize their content a specific way with taxonomy. We want the workflows for this content type to be these 3 options, this content type 6 options. These are real scenarios that I'm sure that we all encounter. And then finally, of course, user interaction. So these are all things that Drupal it uses as a selling point, that we have all this customization available, and there's all this support out there that we can use for one another to use contributed modules, contributed solutions, everything like that. And that's why Drupal is especially ripe for automated testing, because so much can go wrong because it's coming from all different sources. So why Behat? So let's just jump right into why using Behat is a good option. There are other options out there for automated testing that I'm sure some other people are familiar with, whether it be Selenium or custom solutions, whatever the case may be. But Behat specifically is very intuitive and very user-friendly. The startup process for getting Behat ready, it's a composer install. It's one of those things that is not incredibly abrasive to get connected to your system. And once you do that, actually making Behat applicable to what you're building is not difficult at all. So right here, this is one of the context definition files that you have to use to set up your Behat testing. So what does all this mean? Well, if you inspect one of our template pages, so this is just your basic page template that we use, these are div classes. So if you want to utilize something on your page in your Behat test, say you want to validate that every single page has a thank you for visiting, or sign our guest book if we're in 2001. You can do that easily by just defining in your context. As Drupal uses content types to its benefit, we can assume that those nodes have a templated output, and so all you have to do is define, in terms of the visual context, with our div types, you can use labels, or I'm sorry, div classes. You can use labels. Behat actually allows you to use a multitude of ways to contextualize your test cases. So if you are going in and making sure that every single page has navigation, because we don't want users to end up at a dead end and just immediately never come back to the site, you can run a test case that says, okay, in my primary menu, or I'm on this page and I see a primary menu. But we'll get to the logical readout of it here in a second. But what I'm trying to say is the difference between Behat out of the box and Behat for you is just as simple as defining areas on the page. And that's not only front-facing pages, that's also node entry pages, things like that. So let's continue on that thought. So Behat has the benefit of a very legible test structure. These are example lines that you can use in your test cases. So given I'm logged in as, in this example it's a name, but you can also of course use a role. So given I am logged in as an administrator, given I'm logged in as tester 3 role, that is a line you could drop in a test case and use immediately. You don't have to worry about in the database side, okay, this role has what unique ID. It doesn't matter. All you need to know is that you can drop in a name of a user, you can drop in a role. It's all very accessible. When I click a link, as long as that link has a label on your page, Behat will pick it up and put that link for it. I should see the text in the region. So that's where you see from the previous slide, your context comes into play where you want to see this text in the footer. I want to see this text in the main body of my page. And then speaking directly about using forms, say you have a form that is like a time off request or something like that. If you're building an intranet, you want to make sure that that time off request works 1,000% of the time. Because if people can't request time off, then there would be a riot. So an example would be when I select the PTO radio button. So that's your label. And then we can even get as complex as given I run drush, the drush command. So it's very legible. I mean, this is exactly what you're inputting as your test case and what's outputting as a result. So it's something that makes sense to people who may never see the back end of Drupal. If you say, oh yeah, we passed all of our automated tests for that release, just take a look here. It says, especially if there's a particular VIP that you need to make sure every single time has access to whatever they need on your site, you write a test case that says, given I'm logged in as John Smith, and I click this, I will see this. You can get as specific or as general as needed. And so, talking about the output, here's an example. So the feature we want to test is the page content type. So we all have pages, but obviously you can swap that out for whatever content type you'd like. You define your scenario that, and I cut it off here, but you're creating the page content type with the correct role. So in this case, this is what we wrote for this test case. When I'm logged in as a user with the blank role, when I visit the add node page, and I fill in this particular field with this text, and this field with this text, that's all you have to write. And to give you a view into what that looks like on the back end, title is title, body is body. It's as simple as that. Because Behat is looking for those labels, looking for those div classes, it's trying to meet you halfway and do the work for you. So with those three things in mind, you are not only able to reduce the time that it takes to create an automated test case, you're also able to immediately create a deliverable for someone who might be looking for why is this broken, that type of thing. You can say, here's exactly what we got back from our test cases. And they can even go through and say, okay, well, this field is working. This field was working when you ran test cases on Halloween, so something happened since then. So the idea is that not only can you write these things quickly and get started faster, but you have a result that can communicate to anyone. And to that end, what we actually did with a product most recently is I wrote a full suite of test cases during the integration testing phase to test some of our integration pieces, in addition to just making sure we had a solid regression suite, so creating these content types, testing our permissions, things like that. And I was actually able to hand these off with a little bit of editing as user acceptance test cases, because even a person who's never seen your system before is a stakeholder who really needs pages. They can look at this and see, okay, well, I go to this URL and I fill out this field. So it can kind of reduce that time, because who has time for documentation? But in this case, you have the ability to just almost directly transfer from your automated test case to a user acceptance test case. So it's very valuable like that, in that way. So I've been talking a lot, so why don't we actually see what it looks like. So here's that page that we were talking about. The back end of it, we have a title, we have our body, other fun things like paragraphs. So this is what we want to test. We want to test that we can create a page. So what that means, I'm sorry for using the white background. I know that's kind of hearsay, but so I just told it to, so it's cut off a little bit there, but it's /scripts, Behat, features, content, page.feature. So I am running from the command line my test case right now. So what it boils down to is you have a feature that you're testing, whether it be a form, a content type, a user role, and then you give it various scenarios. So it's not just create a content type, period. It is create a content type as the administrator role. And then as this progresses, it will create or attempt to create a page with the incorrect role. So you can see there it says, I should see the following success message, page has been created, and I should see the output of what I just put in on the page. So here's the next scenario. Attempt to create a page without the correct role. So we're no longer administrator, we're authenticated. Well, I guess they can create pages. Whoops, news to me. But so what you can see there is the response to as code should not be 200. So we're getting an error there that they're not able to access that page. And so this is checking that on the back end, if we have created this test page, you can see it on your administrator page. So at the bottom there you see 4 scenarios, 4 passed, 18 steps, 18 passed. So it not only allows you to break down by each line filling out fields, it also allows you to see specifically where it failed. And so I know myself personally, I did have some issues with initially figuring out what Behat was seeing as the label or the div class, and it'll tell you specifically, I couldn't find this label. I don't know what you're trying to tell me to put text into because I can't see it. So if a specific line had failed, we would see that right there. But since they all passed, that's all there. Let's take a step back though and look at our context definition. So on the left here you can see exactly what this test case is, and on the right we have some of that definition. So some of these are regions, labels, div classes. But generally you can see that, as I indicated on that previous slide, this is just pulling from those areas. So look in the homepage views or the way to save or the hero for this. It's as simple as that. You're just, as I, in my crude way, do, I right-click the page, inspect element, and then find exactly what I should be dropping in here. And Behat makes that really easy to just, boom, that's where we want to look. Oh, and one other thing to mention, so we created this page, right? We created this page under admin/content. You can see that page. Well, once this test case is done running, Let's see if my Wi-Fi will keep up here. So right now we're filtered by content type pages. So in theory, we should see test page 1, right? We don't, because Behat goes in and deletes that for you. So any concern over, if I run this test suite, it's going to create a bunch of junk that I have to delete after every release, not a concern. Behat goes in and cleans that up for you after the fact, so that way you can create as much test material as you need and be able to take solace in the fact that after every release you don't have test page, test document, test form, all that. So it's really intuitive and easy to use. I just ran that entire script in 2 minutes, and that's on my relatively old machine. So if you can imagine being able to run multiple feature test cases and multiple scenarios for that feature, you can start to see where you will be able to validate everything when you're releasing. So I've been up here for a while now. What are those 5 steps? That's what we came for. So now that you have a feel for how Behat works and functions and appears, let's go over those rotisserie chicken 5 steps. And actually, before we jump into that, those of you looking for specifically like the composer install steps for installing Behat tests, I have links to those specific steps. And maybe you don't use composer, maybe use another method on the Drupal GovCon site. So if you want to follow along, I won't be going through the specific install process of Behat. This is more just foundationally what will help you get there. But if you're looking for that information, please feel free to go to Drupal GovCon for those links. So getting to the point. So I talked about those 4 major nightmare bullet points that our products use, whether it be multi-factor authentication, encryption, those types of things. All that builds towards your baseline. So when you're releasing version 1.1, what was version 1.0? Like, what makes up that baseline for you? Because at the end of the day, if you have 98 test cases passing and 2 failing, is that acceptable? Is that past your baseline and get you beyond where you need to be? Because maybe your site has a series of forms where you have to have all those forms functioning. Maybe it's very permissions based and it's something that requires something different for everyone who logs in. Or maybe it's just a marketing site and you need to make sure that everything is appearing for these campaigns. Whatever the case may be, it's important to know to start somewhere and create test cases around that so you can build from that. So that is incredibly valuable. So next, define your approach. So I just ran a test case on my local machine immediately. But what we do as a team is we run our test suite after we merge all our branches in Bitbucket, do a code review. When we're actually deploying to our environments with Jenkins, that's when we run our test suite. So it's the idea that developers and we all like to not necessarily have the latest code on our machines. Maybe we're a little lazy with the database pulling down. So with that being said, the most important thing is that this code all works when it's put together. So what you can do is run your test cases when you're building the environment rather than if you individually are just building some code and you don't necessarily need to run on your VM every day. But you could. If you're a team of 100, you're a team of 1, you can install Behat to work for your entire team at specific milestones. Or if you're a team of 1, you can just run Behat at the end of the day just to make sure I didn't set anything on fire. It's completely up to you, and that's your process. So also, you want to define those results. If these results are coming from TFS, Jenkins, what have you, how often do you need those results? You could tie, there's a method, it's on the Drupal GovCon page for this talk. There's a method of also running Behat tests with the cron job. So if you are interested in making sure, if you have an SLA that requires you to have this form, have uptime 24/7, maybe you run Behat tests on it every hour, every day, every month. It's completely up to you how you want to run those tests, but the emphasis is that you have enough of a timeline to define when or where something broke if that happens. So it's completely up to you if you want to do it with every build, every commit, or every day. And then this is the most important part, and the part that stinks. So for some of us, I referenced documentation earlier, and we all want to maintain our documentation and provide that for people. But of course, that's the part that gets dropped first. With Behat testing, it's very important to maintain those test cases, because something that in 1.0 had these fields, maybe in 1.2 they've decided they want to change that content type and remove some fields. That would then result in a failure on your Behat test case. So what we do is we actually, as I mentioned before, write these test cases during the integration phase, so that way we can hand them off to the users for user acceptance testing as well. So not only are we bolstering our test suite, but we're also able to multitask and create user acceptance test cases. And we're based around sprints. If you're based around waterfalls, of course you have milestones, you can build towards that. So if you're launching a major enhancement at this particular milestone, have all the test cases ready for that launch. But it's very important to maintain your test suite. Otherwise, you have to start doing that awkward dance where it's like, yeah, we had 30 failures, but we know we didn't update that thing. So when you're developing, be thinking about what needs to be changing with the test case, or what new test case needs to be created. It's all just a sort of symbiotic relationship, so that way one can validate the other. And then the final step, as we all know as Drupal evangelists, is that share it. In the same way that we all take contributed modules, we all take all these contributed solutions, Behat has plenty of those as well. So I just showed you my implementation of Behat, but I know out there right now there are a couple things that I'm trying to include in our Behat implementation, one of which is, you saw every single step that was written there. There is an extension for Behat that takes a screenshot at every single step. So you can see, okay, this failed. What does that look like? And granted, you can go in and test yourself, but if you want to create a historical record, basically, with screenshots, there's an extension out there for that. And I'm dying to get that included in our implementation. There's also, Behat uses Selenium. It works with Selenium, so if you need to trigger some JavaScript, Selenium is the way to go. We have, like I mentioned before, we use the Google Maps API, so we require Selenium in order to trigger some of those embedded items. There's lots and lots of things out there that are just incredible. Like I mentioned, running Behat on cron jobs, whatever the case may be. So what I did to kind of get you started, in addition to all those links on the Drupal GovCon page, on installing the Behat package, some of those really awesome extensions, is I actually put a templatized version of the test case you just saw. So for all of us that use content types, drop in your fields, drop in the URL that you go to create that content type, and you have yourself a Behat test case. So all you have to do is install Behat, define your context if needed, and as you saw in that test case we just ran, the only context there is what field it's looking for, and that it knows off the bat by using your field labels. So if you go to the page for this talk, you'll have what you need to install it with Composer or other options, tie your Behat to Jenkins, cron jobs, whatever the case may be, using web APIs, and you'll even have a test case to start. So Behat is very much tied to Drupal in that way, that has a great community that we can all take advantage of, and just continue to build your automated testing suite. So that's my 5 steps.
Can I see your feature?
What's that?
Can I see the feature that you wrote?
Sure. The one that we are showing on the...
Yeah, the one on the executive.
Actually, you can get pretty much the same thing off the page. All I did was change the URL, I think, to something generic, and the scenarios to something generic, just because we have specific roles, obviously, and things like that.
Okay.
So yeah, you can. It's in a PDF file. I accidentally uploaded a PDF there because they had an issue with taking TXT files or anything like that. But the text is all there. You can bring it. I'm going to get him first since he read it. Yes, sir.
Can you just go back to slide 4?
Slide. Step 4?
Yep, step 4.
Sure can.
Thank you.
That was easy. Yes, sir.
Yeah, so 2 parts. First of all, when you're dealing with JavaScript components, I know you touched on this, such as like Angular or React, would that be something you would want to integrate with Selenium?
Yes, yes. So Behat actually has extensions specifically for Selenium because, to give you an example of how I was working around it before, so for using Solr and using our search, we don't tie any Ajax to the URL, so there's no way of validating the search results without JavaScript. So what we basically had to do, whereas in other places you could say, if I type this into the search bar, this is the URL I will get, and on the page I will see these things. What you need to actually do, what we had to do to trigger a search was to have Selenium hit that button and trigger the JavaScript. Because it can use fields, it can hit buttons, it can receive an output, but if it's anything based around JavaScript, you will need to use Selenium, unless you work around it, kind of like what we were trying to do. Does that make sense?
It does. And the only other question I had was, do you write your test cases ahead of development, or because I know there are 2 schools of thought to that.
Yeah.
Some people write code to their test cases. I think I heard you say you write your test cases after you develop.
Well, that's an excellent question, and really it depends on. I feel comfortable writing test cases once we have the field types defined, because that is the only thing is that when you're inputting into these fields, Behat just sees a field, but it doesn't recognize that there's a required format for that field. So, for example, if you're entering a date, you might not be able to just type in a date. You have to format it exactly as the field requires. So it kind of depends. When it's a content type creation, as long as we have the exact types of fields, we can run with that. If it's a visual thing, it's a little hairier just because design can change at the last minute. So what I like to do is at least have a template to go along with what they're building. And since maybe we haven't merged all the branches together and built that package, I can still import his code changes and then run it on my local machine just to make sure, okay, we originally said it'd be this, does this test case validate that? So we kind of do a hybrid structure just because it really depends on what's in that sprint, what we're tackling. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Yes, sir.
You said you were testing authentication. How do you do that with CAC cards, and are the passwords encrypted? How does that work?
So what we do a couple of things. So we rely for some of those authentications on the 200 request. The Hat recognizes, like for example, if one of those authentications is based entirely around SOAP requests to an external system, what we basically need to be able to say is, when I click this, does this yield a 200 request rather than 500 or whatever the case may be to the external system? And as a result, am I taken to this page? So in that specific example, we kind of have to dance around it just because we don't have direct interactions with that external system and external agency. So we sort of need to dance around it and make sure that X and Y. But what you can do with Behat is check for cookies. So, for example, when we have one particular functionality that allows a specific function to persist if you're still logged in that instance, if you still have that same cookie. So what we can do is check for that cookie, remove that cookie, all with the Behat test to kind of validate that. So to go back to your specific CAC authentication and encrypted passwords, what we don't store their encrypted password or their PIN. What we do is validate that they have a valid key on their ID card, and then check LDAP to make sure that they're a valid user still in LDAP. So and also that they have a valid account in Active Directory. So it's another checking everything except for this specific through line, just because Behat is not to the point where they can handle encrypted passwords and things like that. Does that kind of answer your question?
Yeah, but if you do less secure testing, but there are passwords in there. Will they encrypt? Can you use encrypted passwords, or are they?
Oh, through the test case. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
I don't know. I actually don't know the answer. I would bet that there's an extension out there to do that, but I have not come across it yet.
Thank you.
But I will check. Yes, sir.
If you're trying to write a test that uses Selenium, do you have to write Selenium tests, or does Behat handle everything with that communication?
To the degree that I've used it, Behat handles it. So we use Selenium to trigger those JavaScript calls. So we do that from Behat. So it's not like you have to write two test cases that have to run simultaneously. It's all handled through Behat. So Selenium has an extension for Behat specifically. So it uses Selenium without having to write something separate for Selenium specifically. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions? Yes, sir.
So have you heard of the Drupal Behat extension and how useful is that?
I actually might be able to show them. Okay. So we actually don't use that in our suite right now, but we have been reviewing that. Have you heard something that you can share?
No, I just wanted to, that's what I was asking. I've heard of it.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, that's one that we've been dancing around. So we actually got started with Behat pretty early on. So even the extensions, what's the word? Compatibility with Drupal 8. I mean, that was something that was still testing the water. So what we use for extensions to get going is this thing called Mink. So that's also in one of the links on the discussion, this talks page. So Mink is the driver that allows you to look specifically for labels, fields, things like that. So it's basically what we use instead.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Last call. What? Sure.
What's your ratio of testers to developers? In other words, test set builders to
Well,
coders.
that's an easy answer for me because I'm the one guy who writes them. And we have about 5 developers on the team. So it works out in that since I'm the product owner, I'm talking to them at the beginning about, all right, how do we build these content types specifically and things like that. So if it was all, hey, we're done developing, write these test cases, I would be very gray by now. But luckily, since I'm at both sides of the process, it allows me to work with them and have those test cases ready when they're ready. I don't recommend the 1 to 5 ratio, but it is absolutely doable. Does anybody else have any other questions? I absolutely encourage you to go to the talks page on the Drupal GovCon site so you can get those resources. I promise it's not like a Facebook article about why Behat is great. It's actual instructions for installation. It's how to use this specific extension. And as I was saying, I still have extensions that I want to include and grow my testing suite. So please take advantage of those resources on that page and to get started and use that test case that I placed on there and see if it works for you. If not, I mean, we're a community, so we can keep building and making it better. Thank you all.
Hey, my name's Chris.
Chris, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you.